everyone, and welcome to another episode of LunarCRUSH Live. We are live this morning with Ben Gervais, co-founder and tech lead at KeyFi. What's up, Ben?
How's it going, guys?
Good, man. Good, man.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here, John. As always, it's a pleasure. We always need to get started real quick, Ben, and just let everyone know, that we just disclaimer: we do not take payment for our live streams. We bring on cool projects, have fun conversations, get to know them, learn about how they build in the industry, and how we're all changing the world together. Make sure you guys get in there and ask some questions for Ben in the chat. We'll do our best to try and get to that stuff. And then hit that subscribe button. That's what we do. We're going to keep bringing on fun, awesome people like Ben, and keep bringing them to you, and try and help everyone out in the industry to understand what we're all doing here. So, Ben, where are you in the world today? What's it like there?
So I'm on the West Coast, but up north in BC. I guess a little bit outside of Vancouver, on a place called Salt Spring Island. Pretty chill.
Ooh.
Nice place. Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful.
That's super cool.
Yeah, it is. It is nice to get away from the winter.
Is it snow up there? But you're so close to the water, it's probably doesn't.
Here, it's like the Hawaii of Canada, basically. So like, it'll just go down to around zero, like in the winter. But like where I was just in Calgary last year, and it'll go down like -30. It's right beside the Rockies. So yeah.
That's awesome. I've never heard the Hawaii of Canada, but I'm interested.
They're both islands. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's like warmest. It's the warmest place in Canada, but that's still not saying much. It's like
I will be looking on Wikipedia later about that for sure. So yeah, man, tell us about your history. How did you get into the space? What makes you passionate about cryptocurrency? What makes it tick? Why are you in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2013, that was the first time I got into, I guess, Bitcoin at that time still, and Litecoin, and there's a bunch of other altcoins there, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit still, because up until that point, I just kind of assumed that I wasn't allowed to do things like trade stocks or whatever. Like that was out of my league or something, right? That's for people with investment accounts or they have a broker or something, right? I was at that point, I was very, let's say, financially illiterate. So then it's like, oh, but I knew websites, right? Websites is something I've been doing for a long time. So development, web software development, stuff like that. But it blew my mind, where I could just go in there and make $100 in a minute or something, right? That volatility, and sort of the exchanges that were around there still, that was a very new thing that I immediately got interested in. I was like, this is cool still. And yeah, I remember the first weekend or something where I just basically sat on the computer on, was it BTCE? I don't know if you guys remember that exchange still.
Yeah.
And the troll box and stuff. Like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, right? So the kind of, I guess my mindset is always very entrepreneurial, and I've got about 100 side projects that have come and gone over the years, right? So I was like, okay, we got to make an analytics site. Look at this cryptocurrency charts.info. This is garbage. We can do better than this, right? So I bought a bunch of domains, do all this stuff, right? And then I don't know, was it 3-4 months later, the price tanked? I was like, oh, that's not good. So then I ended up working on different startups. I worked on a travel startup. I worked on a health startup for biohacking and stuff, right? I got sidetracked and sort of left crypto away until 2017 when I came back. So by 2017, I had been working for a couple of, 3 years on another startup that was in social sort of chat messaging type of stuff. And that went actually really well. And we were going to do an ICO. So we were going to call it Influence. And it was an influencer, ecosystem type of thing. You know, I like at that point it's like token economy. All the ICOs are like, oh, we're gonna make a token economy around like, you know, industry X or something, right? So ours was like, you know, influencers. We had this app already that had tons and tons of mostly Instagram influencers, right? Who are already onboarded. So like, yeah, we're gonna build that. But then kind of like last second, it just didn't go through. I guess there were like legal implications or stuff that there were concerns about there. And at the exact same time, Selfkey did their ICO for a key token. And I was in the same, at this time I was living in Thailand. So I'd been in Thailand for about 5 years still. And Edmund, who's the founder of Selfkey, was living in the same city where I was still. So I went to go meet him. I think it was the day after they did their ICO. And they were like, just like, oh, we need like developers or whatever, right? So I came and I went to work with them first in like DevOps for the Selfkey wallet. Then I started working on the Selfkey browser extension, and then started working on in the R&D team with Edmund and another guy named Carlos. And yeah, we started really, that's when I really started getting into, I guess, decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity, credentials and stuff like that. So that was, you know, a big, that was a great opportunity for me to learn a lot about identity and decentralization at a deeper level beyond sort of like the superficial financial stuff, right? And yeah, really deep dive into like Ethereum, you know, smart contracts, how all that works. And then I guess it was when DeFi started going. So I mean, like we had been talking like to different DeFi platforms like MakerDAO and like Aave and stuff like pretty early on. But then it was like, I guess it was, yeah, 2020, early 2020 when things really start to pick up. And we're watching DeFi like every day, right? We're like, oh, like we got to do something in DeFi. We got to do something in DeFi. When are we going to do something in DeFi, right? So in the R&D department, we did a few different sort of like internal POCs for like a rebalancer and for a risk scoring tool. So that was one of the things that we were talking about was like, oh, okay, so if we're doing all of this identity stuff, how can we use identity in DeFi? You know, we're talking about like under collateralized loans and stuff like that. So yeah, we were exploring that risk scoring of the different DeFi platforms. So I created a risk scoring methodology that takes like, you know, 30, 40 different points and tries to, you know, create a score out of that still. And then we started talking about creating a second token to go along with the key token that would work as an incentivization model, you know, for, well, I guess like to go back to the identity stuff, that was more about like you could stake tokens on your identity and like sort of have it play into that. But eventually it just sort of wandered further and further away from identity. And we decided like, okay, you know what? Like, let's just spin it off. It can be its own project. And it'll just focus on DeFi. And yeah, we'll do some stuff with identity. Like, so we do have, you know, a credentials platform, you know, that's using sort of like Selfkey's technology. And, you know, we've created a pool where, you know, people can stake Selfkey's key tokens, but they have to have the identity credential in order to access that still. So it's a, you know, it's a permission pool there still. So that was a good sort of like pilot project for that use case. And there's actually, you know, additional demand for that as well too, because, you know, there are sort of, I guess, you know, interests out there that want to get into DeFi. They like the way that the infrastructure is built. They like the technology there, but they have legal concerns about, you know, source of funds and, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, who's on the other side of that trade, or, you know, like, you know, if it's money market, like, you know, who's lending and borrowing, where, you know, all of that thing. Right. So, yeah, there's still some demand for that. So that is part of it. But ultimately, you know, for this project for KeyFi, it's just really shifted entirely towards DeFi, and sort of like the niche that you know, that we're wanting to focus on is very much on the app layer. So yeah, we're not really a protocol project. You know, we have some on-chain stuff that's happening, but it's ultimately about the app. So this is you know, collecting data that's obviously is priority number one, is just enormous amounts of data, that's available. I mean, you guys know that you focus a lot on social data, right? So collecting all the data, analyzing it, building machine learning models to analyze this data, and then creating an alert system that is basically connecting all these data points into alerts, and then finally tying that all together with automation. So basically, it's like we can do automated transactions based on the alerts, based on the data. It all works together. And then, working on building a really nice UX, right? So we have an awesome designer on our team, who's, been really, really great at sort of taking some of like our chicken scratch ideas that usually I come up with, like, pen and paper, and like, yeah, this is kind of what it is. And then he'll make something like amazing and beautiful out of it. So that's been really awesome. And then we also just hired another guy. He's a math PhD, who's been able to really help with like, formulas and stuff like that. And he's, helping take the lead with the sort of some of the data analysis and machine learning models as well too. So that's
can you talk a little bit about that and some of the data that you're pulling and how you're aggregating it and how you're kind of quantifying and creating insights out of that?
Yeah. So basically what we're doing is we're going after just as much data as we can in a raw format, and try to do like historical time series and get all of that very raw, and some call it data lake, right? So after that, then there's basically a bunch of different sort of opportunities there to take that data and, like you said, get insights from it. One of the first ones that we're working on for a machine learning model prototype is just a DeFi interest rate prediction, right? So it's basically like, okay, I have stable coins, for example, right? I want to put my stable coins in sort of like the best place for yield. We're going to take all the historical data for all the interest rates. We'll take some additional data about, risk scoring for different platforms, stuff like that, and be like, okay, what's going to be the best allocation for this, right? So then the machine learning model is going to give us, output for that and say, okay, you know what, you should put, 60% in compound USDC. You should put 30% in Aave, DAI or whatever, whatever it ends up, coming out with, right? So, the different platforms, different assets. At this point, also, we're looking at different chains too. Also, Binance Smart Chain and Polygon on top of the Ethereum-based ones, right? So, splitting across all of those three. So that's sort of the first one. But I mean, these can have different objectives, and this ties into a concept that we have on chain called K tokens. So it's not yet released, but basically, it's like fungible interest-bearing tokens that are powered by an AI model, right? So it's not individuals that are deciding, what that token is going to allocate into, right? So is going to be sort of, the AI model that's deciding that allocation, and then the community will vote on that, whether or not to implement the token still. And then people can basically pool into that token. It allocates into different DeFi platforms based on what the AI model said. And, then you get back a interest-bearing token.
So it's kind of like you're aggregating the APY from all of the different tokens that the community votes on. And so if you hold this key token, or do you say K token?
Yeah.
If you hold that, then you're just getting the kind of yield farming from all the different interest-bearing coins that the community has voted on.
Well, it's that the AI picks out, and then the community votes to confirm it.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So the AI is this suggestion engine. And then the community kind of does the final stamp of approval to say, yes, this gets included into the yield of you holding this K token.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Super cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So K token's like a separate token entirely from the KeyFi token.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So KeyFi is, the utility token. It's used for governance. You can also do staked access for a KeyFi Pro app. So we're going to be launching the private beta very, very soon for the KeyFi Pro. We're just sort of
for LunarCRUSH users only. Is that what you're trying to say? No.
Sure, why not? No, we're doing basically it's staked access. So you have KeyFi tokens, you stake them, get access to it, right? And then that'll carry on even after the private beta is closed. So that'll be part of the token economic model. Is you have staking get you access there. So you could also use it if you just want to pay for the subscription, not stake it. That's fine as well. And then obviously it's as an incentivization model, right? For we do liquidity mining for a token, but then also for the K token pools, you get a little incentive that comes back still. And there's a whole sort of like, burning and buyback mechanism that I've outlined for this as well, to try and make the pool self-sustaining, over the long term still. So, that's like, what we call bonding curve for the rewards rate. And then you sort of like periodically it will burn them to create a deflationary effect, and then like do buybacks to refill the reward pool on the smart contracts.
So, but Ben, how do we help translate some of what you're doing? Like we spend a lot of time, it's like a lot of people kind of don't even understand like traditional finance, right? And so it's like they don't understand credit cards. How do you get across the hump of, hey, someone doesn't understand a credit card, but hey, we do AI driven, algorithmically balanced, AI suggested yield farming, right? How do you turn that into hey, come here and you're going to get the best return? Like how are you guys thinking about like messaging and everything when you've got kind of all this science behind what you're doing?
Right. Yeah. So that comes down to, we have obviously I mentioned our designer before, right? Helps make things, to try and be simple and user friendly. There's kind of two ways that you can go. Obviously, there is one way where you are trying to simplify and cater to a large audience, right? But that's also not necessarily everything that we're doing. We do have two apps. One is the KeyFi core app, which is kind of more simple, straightforward, and can evolve into that sort of thing where you're saying like where you're really simplifying it and making it easy and accessible, right? But with the Pro app, we're kind of going in the opposite direction where we want to give, more control, more tools, more data, more, more things, right? For not necessarily for every user. It could just be for pro traders or, people who are a little more, I guess, involved. Like you have a bit more knowledge of both finance and crypto still, right? So they would understand like, okay, I'm creating a long position here. I need to set, a stop loss here, they have some sort of a strategy or a trading thesis or something that they want to follow. And then, giving them tools to, do research, manage their strategy, manage their positions in a new kind of intuitive way still. There's a few new features that be coming out with about that. And the other thing is not just to manage, traditional positions, like I said, like a long or short or something, but also to manage these DeFi, these yield positions in a sense, right? Bless you. Where basically you've got where you're focused on earning yield, right? So I am adding a single asset to a DeFi platform and earning yield on that single asset, or I'm adding two assets paired into a liquidity pool. And then I'm going to farm rewards there, and then I'm going to sell those rewards, and then add more to my liquidity pool holdings, right? So it's like a different way to manage a position, but it's still it's a position still, right? So creating tools around sort of like especially those use cases. It might not be for everybody, in that sense.
It's interesting though what you're saying though, because I mean we talked to a lot of different DeFi projects, and it sounds like you're really focused on AI, on automation, on making decisions for the users because it's way too complicated, and it just gets more complicated as the ecosystem grows. I guess I'd be curious, like with where you're going, who do you see your user being, and I guess where do you see this evolving to?
Right. So I think there's a few different users. Basically, I guess our target user right now is any sort of retail crypto trader, right? Who is not a holder. A holder doesn't really need much. They just need a wallet, pretty much, right? And they're just gonna dollar cost average maybe, or just do a few big buys here and there, and they're just gonna hold it for 5 years or whatever, right? It's not they don't really need a bunch of tools and stuff, right? So this is really more for traders and for people who are really trying to be aggressive with earning DeFi yields. That could have complex strategies that they want to automate, or simplify, take away the opportunity for human error. or, get additional data, get alerts. There's, we can connect so many of these different data points just to the alert system. Beyond, there's so much more beyond price and volume, right? Price and volume alerts, sure, like that's an easy thing, right? But what if I want to create a bot that basically that buys or sells based just on sentiment data, for example, right? And be able to hook that into that sentiment data, create alert, hook that into the actions, create an automation process for that still. So yeah. What was the question? Sorry.
No, just, this was about really the type of users that are using this, and I guess where you see this all going. I mean, you could pull in data infinitely and you can automate infinitely. And I guess what does the end game look like with all of this?
The end game looks like our users using these tools to generate return. And if it does the job, then people are going to be happy with that, right?
So push a button, get yield, done. Yeah. It's like super simple.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. No, I just thinking a little bit about, even kind of like looking at your site here and, the different kind of pools. It's like, how do you guys think about the different chains now? Right. Like we've got Ethereum, we've got BSC, like you're saying, like Polygon, there's Solana, there's Stacks with Bitcoin, there's Avalanche and AVAX, like there's all these, there's Algorand, right? Like all of these kind of like next layer, kind of dApp building tools that are going to be out there. Like, how do you guys, like I see like Ethereum and BSC on there, obviously like, there's a lot of action there. You can't deny it. Whether or not the BSC, like it will still TBD what kind of happens with this like meme token economy over here, which I think they desperately need to figure out the next iteration of what that looks like, now that they've kind of created the pools, and they probably should have had a plan going in. But how do you guys think about, or how are you thinking about all these different kind of chains out there? And I know you're still kind of growing these early stage things, but like, how are you going to think about adding new things that when they come up, like what's the trigger there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Polygon's next on our list. I mean, if we're talking about, multi-chain, right? Right now we're prioritizing like EVM compatible chains, just because it's easy for us to integrate, right? It's the same Web3 calls using the same MetaMask wallet, right? So it's easy for users to switch between Binance Smart Chain, Polygon, Ethereum. Like from a technical perspective, Solana looks pretty good. But all of these other chains, like there's always this the trade-off. I'm sure you guys have talked about this a lot still. Decentralization and security, right? And speed, right? Transaction speed, how fast it's going, transaction cost, how cheap the transaction fees are, right? So there's these trade-offs that are happening whenever they're building them, right? I mean, like, Binance Smart Chain has 21 validators, right? So that's like not a lot, right? Compared to, Ethereum or something, right? So yeah, at the same time, like we're not in the business of like judging protocols and stuff, right? We will adapt to where the liquidity goes, right? We integrated with Binance Smart Chain because it was in demand. Like, people said, hey, we want BSC. Like, and then you go and look on PancakeSwap and there's like, I think at the peak, there's like $8 or $9 billion of liquidity on PancakeSwap, right? That's like, meme token or not, it's
right.
That's a whole strange phenomenon that's happened with all of that still. And personally, for our project, we're not memeing ourselves at all still, right? Like we want to be pretty professional and like straightforward. But as a crypto enthusiast, I love it. Like like I think it's hilarious. As far as deciding which chains, right now, again, prioritizing EVM compatibility for now. And I mean, if something comes out and like dethrones Ethereum or something, then obviously we'll jump on it. That's sort of the nice position that we're in, is that we're building something where the objective is kind of just to connect with everything, right? So we want to be on multiple chains, multiple wallets, multiple platforms, multiple assets, right? And to be able to bring all of these in, and not necessarily everything, but kind of like an 80-20 approach. We want to get, the 20% that have 80% of the liquidity, for example, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I do not envy those protocols. It's a long game for them, right? Like the amount of dApps that need to be built on top, or apps that need to be built on top, that takes time, it takes people, it takes money, it takes effort. But I think once you create that business, and hopefully you're decentralized, then that's like, it's going to be one of the more sticky things in the industry. It's a tough game for those guys though.
Yeah, there's a lot of people like they're building on the protocol level, and it's very competitive. It's very hard to build a community of people to run nodes and be validators and stuff, and then get like a developer ecosystem running on top of that. It's a very daunting task, and I mean, I'm not sure if a lot of them should even be doing that. There might be better ways to spend their time and resources. Just do we really need another one?
No, John and I were talking about this a lot when we were in Miami for the Bitcoin conference. It's almost like too entrepreneurial in the space. It's almost like every single person that gets into the space is so entrepreneurial and wants to start their own thing, that they now have created like 38 competing products where there should be like 3. And maybe someone's ego is such that, if they fail, they still won't go help the other person, even though that other person literally had something so close to their idea that, all things aside, they should probably just be best friends.
It's an interesting scenario though, because like if a company goes out of business, okay, go do something else. Now all these 2-3 person companies have tokens that are in market. It's not so easy to just drop it. It's like it's a really confusing environment. And when you see 8,000-9,000 tokens traded a day, and there's like another 10,000 to 20,000 on top of that aren't traded every day, it's becoming quite a mess. And it's also interesting. Like a lot of these chains are saying exactly the same thing. Like, we're the fastest, we're the most scalable, we're the most secure. And I'd wonder, like, from your side too, I know you look at it like, how much liquidity is there on that chain, what's available to us because you're a DeFi product, but like, how do you look at security when you look at these chains? And I guess also when you look at your own product, I noticed, I think you have Hacken on your bottom corner of your app. I'd be curious how you look at security.
Sure. So I mean, there's risk everywhere in crypto, right? It's a minefield, right? So you've got there's technical risk, in case of like, we're talking about a smart contract having some sort of an exploit that's available. There's like economic risk, just like a poorly designed, economic system or something, right, that lends itself out to exploits. There's outright, scams and phishing and stuff that people are trying to steal your seed phrase or your private keys. There's rug pull, team risk, right? There's all kinds of different risk, right? And then from like, the security perspective, I mean, we have all the tools, they're just not convenient, right? You can go and, set up a cold storage wallet, and, you could, be really sort of like careful about your OPSEC and stuff like that. But it's too much for most people, right? One thing I do really, everyone that I know, I do push them to get a hardware wallet. I mean, that's sort of like pretty straightforward, like sort of a base thing that you need to do there. But a lot of people, they'll just have, thousands or tens of thousands, $100,000 in, Binance or something, right? With like no 2FA.
Right.
They're just like, whatevs, YOLO. Like, so yeah, it's obviously, yeah, security is a big concern, across many levels still. But I think the big challenge is just getting people to actually adopt security best practices. I mean, it's hard enough. I try to get my mom to use a password manager, you know, like that's like mission impossible. Like, you know,
Yeah.
Right.
Or just like the same email address. Like, you know, people don't realize, like, even if you had like a hex, you know, password that's 50 characters long, but you're still using the same email address for everything. Like, there's one piece that's always the same. It's like, well, what if for every single login you can have a different email address?
yeah,
Right. And it's like, or just not give someone access because you're using, you know, like a browser extension that only you have a passphrase to or something. It's like people need to be kind of unwound, like you're saying, from this world where normally they just have money in a bank and that bank
yeah,
keeps it safe and the government backs it up to a certain, you know, extent. It's like, that's not the case out here. It's still kind of this wild, wild west of like the market is being developed and it's in its infancy. And, you know, if you forget this 12-word thing, you know, or you didn't save it the correct way, or you left it on Binance and then, you know, you realize like, oh, I live in a country where that's no longer allowed. Suddenly it's gone. Like, you know, but people aren't, they're just not trained to that extent yet.
yeah. And that's another sort of, I guess like a mental shift that people have to take where, they're like, okay, so I have money in my banking app or something, right? But now like especially if you're holding your own keys, you're responsible, right? Um, it's kind of like having a giant box of cash under your bed in a way, but you just have the ability to, you know, throw it across the world, you know, to somebody else really quickly. So yeah, there's I know there are some guys that they prefer to keep it on a centralized platform that has, so like, so long as they have insurance, right?
Right.
So they're like, okay, you know what, my funds are here, but they are insured and like regulated or whatever, right? You know, so I feel safer, you know, having it with these guys have custody of it, than I would having self custody, um, which I could understand, especially if you're getting into, you know, very like high net worth, you know, sort of holdings. That can be like a physical security risk as well, too, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard about like stick ups at like Bitcoin meetups. You know, that's like a thing that's happened, right? You know, so yeah, there are a bunch of security implications there, for sure. That I don't think there's a perfect solution to it at this point. Still, I think there's a lot of different options that you can sort of take advantage of, but yeah, it would be good to see less people get scammed, and less of that just in general still. Um, it blows me away like how some of these guys, like, they go out and, you know, the like scammers and stuff, right? They put so much like work and like effort into some of these things, right? Um, what if they just like, you know, put that all of that energy and effort into, you know, building something useful and good, or, you know, like, why not just go that way? I don't know. That's a whole other thing.
The whole custody topic is such an interesting one because I think everyone has their POV, but they're at a certain individually they're at a certain evolution in their own life cycle in crypto investing. And I think it's interesting. Like if you're someone that's just put a few $100 in, you have a
Yeah.
very, very different perspective than, you know, getting in 2012 and owning thousands of Bitcoin. You know, like you have a very, very different, you know, view at this. You're probably scared, you know, versus and maybe don't know what to do and actually don't even probably know who to turn to. Like, who can help me do this right? Does anyone have it right? So it's a pretty complicated topic. And I always wonder, you know, when I see like Michael Saylor go out and buy billions in Bitcoin, like what's that actual process like? Like what is the actual process? I want to know more, and I don't think I've heard it. But
Yeah, so
it's
he's
interesting.
released like I think like or didn't he have a talk or something with like 3,000 CFOs or whatever, like trying to
Yeah.
explain his process and stuff? Is it basically you just have to split the orders across like a lot of different platforms, right? You know,
Yeah, and like very, very
otherwise,
small orders, very frequent. But
yeah,
the
yeah,
actual like, I mean, even in that scenario, like the custody of like $1 to $5 million, that's a lot of money. But when you're talking that scale, I mean, can you even put it in cold storage in one place? Do you have it in 5 places? Who has it? Like you start to get into these really complicated scenarios of, you know, liability. And I think I did want to ask about insurance, because this ultimately heads right towards insurance. And I guess from the perspective of KeyFi, how do you view insurance within the context of DeFi and your platform?
Well, there's a few ways. So one of the integrations that we actually do is with the centralized platform called Nexo. So when the Pro app comes out, basically we've already got an integration with their API where you can do deposits into their earn system, and they are pretty heavily insured still. So that is one way to go about it. You go to a centralized, one where they have insurance. The other one is the decentralized insurance. Or was it Nexus Mutual, right?
Yep.
So it'd be integrating with something like that. So I think that's really interesting. The decentralized sort of approach there still, because basically it's anytime that you do these decentralized things, it just opens it up more still, right? Like I guess there's not really any restrictions on who can go and do that, as long as you pay for the premium. You should have coverage, right? I suppose there's still some risk that Nexus Mutual could fail, just completely, and you wouldn't get your insurance payout, and that might not be any recourse as there would with a centralized exchange or a centralized service where, there's an entity that you could sue, if they screw up or something, right? And, you could at least take them to court. But with the DeFi ones, maybe not. You would have an insurance policy on deposit somewhere, and I don't know if I don't think you could sue Wi-Fi, for example, right? Or Wirearn, sorry. So yeah, that's probably a space that needs to evolve a bit more still, and definitely needs to be made simpler, I guess, for the user. So something like automating the process of setting up an insurance policy on your yield positions. I think that would be nice.
I'll give you an idea. I'd like just to check a box when I go and place a trade, and it just takes a bit of the yield away from me, and I'm insured on the rest, and don't make me think about it. That would be amazing. And if it's some sort of API hooked into Nexus Mutual in the back end, smart contract, works all the ways, including paying you out if something happens. It's just, this seems to be the biggest issue in DeFi. For newcomers, especially, they're scared. They don't trust these brand new things with very small brands. And, here's $300,000. I don't know who you are. I'm just going to throw it. So
I think the hardest part about insurance is the part where you said the if something happens part, because it's, if something happens, who decides whether or not you get paid out, right? If you think about insurance companies, it's like with COVID. As soon as COVID happens, every insurance company just scrambled to write all of that out of everyone's contracts as fast as humanly possible. In insurance companies, I think the number one thing they say is how to screw everyone. That's number one. Get that shit out of the contract immediately. But then it's who do you go fight? It's if someone backs into someone else with their car and you've got a decentralized insurance product, right? Who comes to check, right? Who's the mediator, right? And so I think I'm hearing more grumblings around the industry of people starting to organize some of these things and some very large scale things that are going to happen here soon. So I'm very interested to see, because this is just something, you think the math is there, risk assurance, it's there. It's just a matter of how do you decide that if something happens. So if I fat finger a wallet address, is that on me? Is that are they going to know? How do they know? They're oh, you put this in wrong on purpose. Now you're getting paid out on this. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Can you get insurance for your boating accident, right?
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Whose fault was it? How much do they deserve? What percent? There's an evaluation that is a centralized evaluation.
Yeah.
You can't just go, okay, cool. Here's your money because you paid me. So we're good now. Done. It's never that simple. But yeah, this is fascinating. But it's also one of the bigger issues. Feeling good about what you're doing. Sleeping at night.
But that's why the returns are there in crypto, right? Because of the risk, if there was no risk, probably wouldn't get as high a return.
Right.
So then how do you see that working? There's so much discussion about, working with centralized entities, banks, CeFi plus DeFi, whatever we're going to call it. I don't know
Yeah.
what phrase has been coined yet.
Yeah.
CDFi, like, so like if there's so much risk, and you're going to see the banks get involved in some manner. How do you see that evolving?
Right. So I think the issue with banks, from my perspective, is that right now, if a problem happens, they can just go in the database and just adjust everyone's balance.
Right.
Can't do that on DeFi, right? Like, the bank doesn't have the authority to just go and like put the tokens back, right? That's not how it works. So that's, I think, the biggest barrier in that sense, though. So I'm not sure how I'm not like a real like centralized finance guy or anything. So, but I'm not entirely sure how a bank would be able to like really leverage some of this stuff. I think probably they're just going to approach it as an investment class, I guess. Like these crypto assets are something that you could buy and sell, more or less, right? And then I guess they'll have sort of internal holdings that they would allocate to their customers, in sort of in a more centralized manner for them, where they kind of maybe like, I don't know, maybe like, I don't know, Chase Bank goes out and buys like, 100,000 Bitcoin or something, right? And then they just keep those 100,000 Bitcoin inside their little walled garden, and it never really goes back out into the wild. But then they can allocate those balances for their customers. I don't know, maybe something like that.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because they're going to want that custody if they're going to bear that risk.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Versus like, I think some discussions I've heard have been like, oh yeah, which are they going to work with Aave, or going to work with Compound? Are they going to do this or that? And the more I think about it, I'm like, well, it's not only risky. It's like, okay, so if I could get 11% on something in Aave, what do you want to bet if that bank is offering? They'll rebrand whatever it is, and what do you want to bet that bank will give you 1%, and you're stoked because right now you're getting 0.01% in your bank.
Yeah. So interest rates are outrageous. Like, yeah.
Interesting. So where do you see, like, where are we at with DeFi adoption right now? Like, where are we at in I guess, are we in the infancy? Are we still in the first inning? Where do you see in general DeFi going?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, it's infancy. I mean, just like, how long is it? It's been like really only been picking up for 18 months, let's say. I'd say, right. Like, I watched the DeFi Pulse Index, go from like, I remember when it hit 1 billion, like 1 billion, and it was like, wow, right. So yeah, it's still very early for that. I think probably in the future, you're going to see the meme stuff is probably going to die down. You're going to see a lot of things that are claiming to be DeFi that are not really DeFi. They're really just like,
right.
Kind of pointless stuff is going to eventually fade away still. But stuff that really makes sense, which is improving interest rates on stablecoin yields, that's the thing that everybody wants, right? I mean, you can put 10% yield in everyone's pocket in the world. I mean, that's, there's a huge opportunity for that still. Just that still. Just getting people to trust a USDC deposit in a smart contract and get 10% yield. If you can create a user experience that's friendly enough, and you can create enough trust, that, my aunt, my uncle, or my sister who works in a bank and wants nothing to do with crypto, you get them to like, to trust that and to get into that. There's a huge opportunity there. So, yeah. And then, obviously the lending part of that as well too, being able to do leverage positions on chain by using these sort of money markets. If the rates for borrowing are competitive as well too. I wonder, it seems right now like the move would be to take advantage of the low interest rates for centralized finance, like borrowing, and then like put that, because I mean, you could put that and get more yield than what it would cost you to borrow, right? So probably an opportunity there to try and like link those two together. And I wonder if that happened enough, if that would like kind of self-correct at some point.
I think that's what Saylor was saying when I don't know if he mentioned, he's like, taking a loan out on your house and putting it into Bitcoin. I think it was like out of context, like the way he said it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like you can go get a 30-year loan right now for 2.6%, right? And then you can turn around and go to even like a super centralized Coinbase and get 4% on USDC, right? So like 4 minus 2, like carry the 1, like, it's like, it's pretty simple math right there to understand that like there's outperforming assets. And, the one thing I love is that, like I was saying, like a lot of people don't understand traditional finance. And this is bringing in a whole new class of people that are understanding NFTs is the first time they get in, and they're like, okay, I got to get Ethereum. And then like, ooh, if I press this button on Curve or wherever I'm at, then I get this interest rate. And it's just this whole new training of finance that's going on. And I think you're exactly right, where it's like, the way I try to explain it to a generation or anyone that doesn't really understand what's going on is, if you can get 8% on a stable coin, the amount of money that you need to put in to expose to that risk is much lower to get the same yield that you get from, I don't know what the number one like interest bearing account is, probably like a Marcus at like Goldman Sachs for like 2% or something like that on some sort of like CD, certificate of deposit, which is like crazy to even think about that word. But it's like you need to put, so if you've got $1 million to get the same, 3% that you were going to get there, you only need to put $100,000 in, so it's like your risk, your exposure is different. And so I think that's like gets people over the hump. They're like, oh, okay, like I can get the same return, but I only need to put this at risk. But it's also has a lot to do with like age and the person. And, if someone's worked their entire life to get this thing and they just truly, they're like, the best question I always get is like, well, where does it go? Like, where does the money, when I press this button, where does it go? And so I always say, well, where does it go when you give it to the bank? Right? They're like, well, the bank has it. I was like, well, the bank doesn't have it. They have 0% reserve requirements. I go, didn't you watch like It's a Wonderful Life? Like it's in his house or their house or wherever. So I was like, it's the same thing. I was like, but the bank's running, AWS or Microsoft servers. And the DeFi protocol is probably doing the same, right? That's why Bitcoin's, Bitcoin is because you don't have to worry about it. But it's people like I'm already past them, right? So it's like you just have to say, put a little bit of money in, press the button, see what happens, and like that's how they have to learn.
Yeah. The best way to learn is to just do it, right? Like to actually just jump in and start trying things. So, yeah, that's my advice to anyone out there who is looking to try DeFi for the first time. You just gotta go in and try it, bud.
That is so true. It's funny. It's more of a mechanics / user experience game than it is a financial game. Like once you figure out that pattern, even some of these things you could say like staking, for example, like some of these different tools, they make you have to claim and then like re-add those funds back into the pool. Like some of them make you come back every day to do this thing. It's like it ends up becoming a habit and a mechanic versus like, what's my yield? Like most of the time you're not even paying attention. You just know that you have a task to do and you get used to it. Even if the experience is subpar, you still just get used to it. So it's pretty interesting to see that. And I think like that part of it seems to be like, man, there's so much room for improvement on the user experience side of it. And I'm especially curious to hear your view on that, where, you're really focused on automation. It sounds like longer term. And I guess, how do you see user experience and automation like coming together? Where do you see that going?
Well, I think what you're going to see is the infrastructure kind of remain mostly the same, right? So, the way that these smart contracts are built and, the functions that need to be called and, like you said, like the steps, people have to go through and do all of these things manually right now, right? That underlying layer is probably not going to change too much still. Like there's only so much you can do with Solidity, in terms of how things are getting managed, like, and then if you want the composability of DeFi, which is again one of the awesomest sort of things about it is, how you can have platforms interact with other platforms and layer things, right? So you could basically keep the mechanics all the same as they are now, and then just create automation flows, right? So that instead of having to go and like claim those rewards and sell them and re-add to your liquidity position, it just is doing that for you automatically, you know. But then the issue here is there's two of them for automation with DeFi specifically, is that you need to have either a smart contract that you can trust, that you can put your funds into, or that contract is going to be able to control your yield positions, right? And then there's going to be another bot, like, you know, maybe a centralized automation service that's you're giving permission to sort of manage your funds on chain like that. Or you're going to have to run something locally and like run a soft wallet with like a little automation server on your computer or something like that, right? So there's either trade-offs of like, you know, there's, you know, you're going to have to trust some kind of a service to run the automation for you, or you can run it yourself, but it's a little bit more hassle, right? So we're actually working on both of these still. We're working on both the smart contract automation aspect of it, and also because we're working with Selfkey. They have a desktop wallet that's open source. So been talking with them about adding in automation into their Selfkey, the Selfkey wallet. So basically somebody could download Selfkey wallet, just run it on their computer. The wallet would connect to our API to get the alerts feeds, right? And then, you know, based on those conditions that happen, it could trigger a transaction locally from their soft wallet there, right? I don't see any way to automate a hardware wallet. So yeah, if you have any ideas on that, I mean, you gotta go click the button to, you know, approve the transaction, right? So, which is unfortunate, you know, but at the same time, you know, I think that's the trade-off there, right? So, yeah, those are the two sort of approaches to automation that we're looking at. And again, like, you know, the mechanics of DeFi don't necessarily have to change much. It's really just removing all of that from the user's experience and letting them just, you know, focus on a couple of things. And, you know, most of the population, they don't want to look, you know, at their banking app every day necessarily, right? Like, you know, they just want to put their money in a savings account and then like check it once a year or something and, you know, see how much it's gone up or whatever, right? Nobody wants to go collect yield, you know, like,
wait, so I'm not normal. What are you trying to say? Yeah. No, when the market's going up, how do I sleep? No, no, you're right though. The majority, like a lot of people just, you know, like I would say, that if they're not understanding it, they want it to be simple. You know, they want it like take all the intelligence and bring it down to a button and make this simple for me, and you're gonna win.
Yeah. Where's the make money button? You know, let me press that. All right.
Get to work.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Well, we're coming up on time here. I really, you know, appreciate you coming on and sharing everything with us. I mean, how do people get started on KeyFi? Like, where do they go? Where do you suggest they go to kind of get started in the simplest way? And how do they find you guys?
Yeah. So you go to keyfi.com and yeah, you can learn more about the project there still. You jump in our Telegram group as well too. Say hello. Yeah, I mean, you know, the private beta is going to be coming really soon for KeyFi Pro. So that's what I say I'm really excited for. So if you want to get access to KeyFi Pro for the private beta, you can get some KeyFi tokens and have those staked in the staking contract, and then you can earn some more KeyFi. You know, we have a bunch of other sort of, you know, liquidity pools and some other stuff that we're experimenting with there. But yeah, that would be it still. If our marketing guy Vinny was here, he'd be so mad still that I'm just doing a terrible job of this. So.
KeyFi, we'll try to help him out. So KeyFi.com, get in there, connect your wallet. Start looking at some of the earn, start looking at deposit. I see you have swapping in there, you know, with Uniswap and 1inch and everyone else. You've got the pools. You got a really cool dashboard. I like I don't know if it's the dashboard or I like where you can actually like look at I feel like there's like a huge opportunity for like accounting platforms with blockchain because it's all there. I like that you could like add just an address and kind of it'll organize it for you. Haven't seen anyone else that's doing that. So that's really cool too. But yeah, no, definitely everyone get in there. It looks like you got a couple different, you got Chinese and English in here too, which is really cool.
如果有别人那个 他们听你说了我们有那个中文的软件呢，也可以了。
So now I see why you're prioritizing multiple languages. Very well done.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, no, cool, Ben. This is awesome, man. I wish you guys the best of luck. I think you're going to do really well. Very clean app. You're thinking about all the right things, and appreciate you coming on here today and sharing it with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, yeah, I mean, like, we've only been around for six or 7 months, I think now still. So, it's very early stage development, startups. That's what I like doing. So, yeah.
No, welcome. Thank you so much, man. And we'll chat with you backstage. And everyone listening, thank you so much. Check them out, keyfi.com. And John, as always,